I'm Steve Garry. You're watching Taped with Rabbi Doug. Shalom, baby.
We're gonna see Rabbi Doug. We're gonna see Rabbi Doug. We're gonna see Rabbi Doug on your TV tonight. But Daddy, I want to watch Monday Night Football.
Forget about Monday Night Football. There's no other thing we're going to watch on Monday but Rabbi Doug.
Yeah, Rabbi Doug on TV tonight. We're going to see Rabbi Doug. Oh, everybody talk about Doug.
Shalom and welcome to Taped with Rabbi Doug. Glad you could be with us today. It is my great honor to have back on the show for the umpteenth time, actually, a number of times over the years, my good friend Rick Kaempfer. Well, Rick, welcome back to the show. So good to see you. This is really a great honor to have you on the show because you are like my go-to guy about so many people that I've met over the years and had as guests on our show. Yeah. You've actually been the person that knew them before I did. Of my favorite guests on the show, besides having you, is of course John Records Landecker. Oh, yeah. One of my favorite shows I've ever done with anyone because he is so talented, so animated, and so hilarious. And you were his producer, right? And that's how I met him. You were his producer for how many years? For a long time, 10 right? 10 years. 10 years with him. But we go way back before that. Because as many of you know who are fans, I was a semi-regular on the Steve Garry Meyer show on Steve Garry, and Rick was their producer. I was. He was their producer. What years were you producer for them?
In late 80s, early 90s.
Late 80s, early 90s.
87 to 91.
Right along the times that I was on with them. And I'm still in touch with both of them. Okay. Yeah, thank God. I talk to both of them semi-regularly and get talked about every once in a while when I'm listening with Steve. I hear him mention me. Oh, really? So we got to talk to Rabbi Doug about that or something. And then I get a call every now and then. So that's always a nice thing. And Gary is not living in Chicago right now, but he and I talk regularly. And he's talked about when he comes to town maybe being on the show. And he said we could even do a Zoom thing if I don't want to wait. Okay. So we'll see. We'll work on that for the future. But I want to talk about, you have been publishing books for a long time now and taking on authors of your liking to put together for books. And we've had a number of them on our show as well. But one of the greatest things that I love is your connection to radio. And I just want to talk about a couple of your books today that are very important, but I want to present this one too. This is your novel, Back in the DDR, a novel by Rick Kaempfer. And Rick Kaempfer's novel is about growing up in Germany, but it's really a novel. It's not about himself, but he bases a lot of things on his life.
Correct. It's a spy novel. It takes place in the Cold War in the 70s. Wow. There's bad guys running around, and the main character is a 13-year-old boy, closely resembling me. That's where I lived.
That's very, very cool, very cool. And it's your first novel, right?
No, it's my third novel.
It's your third novel. What other books were novels that you wrote?
I wrote a book called
Because I never even had on with a novel. Severance?
And then I wrote a novel called The Living Wills. The Living Wills. With Brendan Sullivan, who was another guy from The Loop. And we did that as an improv. We improv the chapters.
So you published so many books I don't even know about some of them. That's very cool. Back in the DDR. So I wanted to, though, talk about two of my favorite books of yours right now. And this book now is in its 5th edition, 6th edition in its works. EveryCubEver, a comprehensive guide to everyone who wore the uniform from 1871 to 2022. And it's just amazing because you update every player, you tell the history of every player, and really it's a history of the Chicago Cubs that nobody ever has written except for you. And I really want to know, in talking about this book just a little bit, how did you do your research on every single player? How do you find every player? How do you find the players that were brought in, played 2 games and were traded, or were let go, or didn't have contracts and they brought them in? How do you find those people, and how do you get biographies about them?
Well, some of them go back to the 1870s, right? And there was one guy that I couldn't find anything about. I didn't even know if he was right-handed or left-handed or what position he played or anything. But he's still in the book because what I did find I put in there. But most of the information came from, you know, just research, studying obituaries. You know, when these guys die, you look up their name in obituaries and you find all sorts of information.
Sure.
And this book is not about statistics. It's not about, you know, what they hit in 1974.
No, it's about who they were.
Yes, exactly.
And how they got into baseball or whatever else you can share about them.
That's right.
And it's very, very cool. Of all the Cubs, I know this is a tough question.
Yeah.
Of all the Cubs over the years, who would you say was the most exciting to find out the information about their lives?
Oh, wow, that's a good one.
I know. That's why I asked.
You know who was really interesting was Rogers Hornsby.
Rogers Hornsby, everybody knows that name, but
Yes.
they don't know much about him because he was a long time ago.
Right, he was a Hall of Famer, but he was also a compulsive gambler. And the commissioner of baseball, Judge Kennesaw Mountain Landis, was constantly monitoring him to make sure he did not bet on baseball. He only bet on horse racing. And then he would borrow money from his teammates, and he became the manager. He would borrow money from his players, and if he didn't like a player or they, you know, he owed them money, he wouldn't put them in the game. And I knew none of this when I started researching it. Really fascinating story.
Very cool, very cool. So I wanted to ask you about this also, and unfortunately we didn't do a full show on this book because I had a lot of questions, but I want to get a few in today because we want to talk about your latest book. Tell me, when you published the first volume and then, you know, did your research and everything like that, were there anybody from the Cubs that contacted you, any former Cub or family of former Cubs who said, hey, you didn't get that right, or, you know, you could have added this to it and you didn't? And my question is, when you did the next volume, did you add something that somebody told you?
Yes, there were lots of Cubs players have contacted me and that I've added stuff. There was one Cub player, Steve Trout.
Everybody remembers his name also, if you're a Cub fan.
I put a story in there about a burrito eating contest that he got into in San Diego with his teammates once, and he told me it wasn't true. And I said, well, I heard an interview of you telling that story of Steve Trout. He goes, oh, really? I said, yeah. He goes, well, I guess it was true then. So,
that's great. That's great.
So that's one of the stories in the book.
That's great. In famous plays or famous games that people stood out in, what would you say was this player stood out because of this? What was it in actual baseball itself?
You know, I was talking to Bruce Wolf, our
dear friend,
mutual friend, the other day.
Sportscaster?
Yes, and he said that the most important moment in Cubs history, and I agree with him on this, is that the ground ball to Chris Bryant in 2016 in the World Series, that moment that he gets the ball and he's got a smile on his face before he throws the ball to first base, and he knows that they're about to win the World Series, and you can see the joy in his face. That is the moment.
That is so cool.
Yeah.
So cool. How about, just a couple more questions about this book that I want to know. How about players that had magic moments on other teams before or after they were on the Cubs? Did you talk about any of those magic moments in your book?
Yeah. There was a guy named Lou Brock. I don't know if you heard.
Oh, absolutely. We all know Lou Brock, of course.
Started with the Cubs and was traded. St. Louis.
St. Louis, I was right. Oh, there you go.
Traded mid-season to St. Louis and
became a superstar.
Became a superstar, but was not a superstar with the Cubs.
Right.
There are so many stories of players that were traded by the Cubs and became stars elsewhere.
And how about players that became well-known sportscasters? Do you talk about them in the book?
I do. There's many of them. Joe Garagiola was a Cubs player, and he was a catcher.
Yeah.
His claim to fame as a Cubs player was he was the catcher on the hottest day in Chicago history. It was like 103 degrees with the heat index and everything, and he caught all 9 innings with the gear on and everything. Lost 8 pounds during the game, and then became a Hall of Fame broadcaster after that.
I still substitute teach, And there's always two questions that I ask the kids when they say, let's play Jeopardy in class, let's do a question. They all want to do sports questions and stuff. So I ask them Jewish sports questions. I say to them, I said, who's the most famous pitcher who wouldn't pitch on the Yom Kippur Jewish holiday and is a Hall of Famer and a no hitter? And everybody knows Sandy Koufax. Everybody knows Sandy Koufax's name. But they don't know because they're just a little bit under the age of knowing who is a famous broadcaster who was on the Cubs and the Sox and Jewish, and of course Steve Stone. And so these are there's
another one, Ken Holtzman.
Ken Holtzman, also a no-hitter, also. Yeah. And Ken Holtzman, by the way, where I was the rabbi for 20 years, my partner Rabbi Kaganoff of blessed memory, officiated at his wedding.
How about that?
Yeah, so they were members of our congregation.
That's great.
Yeah. Kenny's what a great guy.
2 no-hitters.
What a great guy. 2 no-hitters. Yeah, great guy. Well, this is great. EveryCubEver. You will want to check that book out. But I want to talk about this book because back in the day, when you wrote your book about being a producer in radio and about radio, I never thought you would go back and tell the history of one radio station. This is Rick's latest book, and I was so excited when I kept saying I wanted to have him on after EveryCubEver, and we just didn't work it out. The pandemic hit us and everything. Yeah. And when this came out, I said, Rick, we got to do this. This is it. It's the Loop Files. It is the history, an oral history of the most outrageous radio station ever. And for those of you who don't really remember the Loop, there is still a Loop radio on, it's owned by WKQX, 101.1. It's the channel, which is their high
the
HD, high definition, high definition B or 2, depending on your high definition radio for 101.1, and it is the Loop. It is the remnants of the Loop radio station, which used to be 97.9 WLUP, and they still keep to the same format of music. And it's also, I believe they have an app also that people can download and listen to that station as well. It is on my car.
Is it?
It's on my car, yeah. I have high definition in my car, and I flip it on now and then. It's great, it's great. No DJs though. It's just music and the Loop. Yeah. Same commercials, same promos. So the Loop Files. So you go through the history of the beginning of the Loop. So why don't you tell our viewers first, what was the Loop before it was the Loop and how did it become WLUP?
It was a station called SDM, smack dab in the middle, if I got the correct call letters. And at one point it was all female jocks. The disc jockeys were all female. They were called the Den Pals. And they played like jazz and light rock and that sort of thing. And then in 1977, it became the Loop. Mm-hmm. And there's a story in here about how it was named. The program director moved in from Dallas or something, and his wife was looking through the Chicago Tribune, and she said, you know, the word loop appears like 23 times in section A of the paper. And he goes, then let's call it the Loop. And that's how, in 1977.
And they applied for those letters.
WLUP.
That's so cool.
That's right.
So cool, so cool. So what is it? What is at the origin of the Loop and its change? Of course, one of the other guests that you introduced me to, who I actually met myself also because we used to do concerts together, and run it was the late Chet Kopic.
Oh,
and by the way, Chet Kopic, his very last television appearance ever, he was killed in a car accident just a couple of weeks after being on television with me.
Right.
And you can see that at on our website, tvrabbi.com. You can look down through the archives and find my show with Chet Kopic, who's just a great guy. But he and I used to do concerts together, and we'd run into each other at concerts and sit together, and that was kind of a cool thing once we became friendly. And much missed, a real character, a great guy. Had him on my show the very first time at a funeral for the famous Jewish quarterback of the Chicago Bears,
Sid Luckman.
Sid Luckman, very good. So he was there covering it, and I was there covering it.
How about
and
that?
I had him on my show the very first time at that funeral on on that day. So, and I taught Sid Luckman's grandchildren in Highland Park, so I had a good connection to that family as well. So tell me, what stands out in the Loop Files? I mean, we talk about Jonathan Brandmeier, we talk about Steve Dahl, we talk about Gary Meyer, we talk about all the sportscasters, we talk about all the other DJs who had characters that they represented. What stands out for you in the book when people say, well, what was my favorite thing about the Loop? Well, I knew those DJs, I loved them. But what made that station so special, and what do you love that you talked about?
So for me, it was a time when the 1927 Yankees of radio were all in one hallway at one time, working at one radio station.
23rd floor of the
37th.
37th floor. Yeah. Sorry, 37th floor of the John Hancock building.
He was in there.
I was there many times. I don't know why I thought 23rd. 37th floor of the John Hancock building.
Right, and we were all there. I mean, it was, you mentioned Jonathan Brandmeier, Kevin Matthews, and Steve Garry. They're all in the Radio Hall of Fame. They're, legendary. And then we had, that was on the AM. On the FM, we had Bob Stroud and Bobby Skafish and Patty Hayes. And these are the greatest music jocks of all time. And we were all working there at the same time. And we had no rules, basically. Our bosses were Jimmy DeCastro and Larry Wirt, and they basically said, do entertaining radio, whatever it takes to do entertaining radio. And so the freedom enabled us to do things that people are still talking about today.
Sure. And probably the most famous international known event was at Sox Park with Steve Dahl, with the disco demolition.
Right.
And you do talk about that in the book.
Of course.
And that's still today. The anniversary of that is in every Chicago newspaper every year. And sometimes you find out some new information that you didn't know about it the next time you read the paper.
Well,
but it's all in here.
I interviewed Steve for the, it's in the, there's an interview of Steve Dahl about disco demolition, but also a lot of the other people that were there at disco demolition. So we tell that story from the perspective of the people that were actually there.
Wow. So what do you think? I want to ask you just on your own, not about the book, because you and baseball, that connection and everything with the Cubs and the Sox and disco demolition. What about the shooting at Sox Park this past year, and the not shutting down of Sox Park after the shooting?
Isn't that something?
Isn't it something?
Yeah.
What do you think went on with that? I was curious on your thoughts, because that's something that I know if you decide to write a book about the Sox, that's going to be a big part of it.
Yeah. Well, you're right. The most interesting thing is the decision to just carry on. That they knew there was a gunshot. To me, the most interesting part is that they said that this person smuggled the gun in the folds of their fatness. Like they had, I forget what the term is for that, but and they had the gun somehow stuck in there. I don't know if that's true or not.
No, I've heard that too. But crazy stuff.
That's a very
and more book material,
story.
Definitely.
Yes.
And do you talk about the Cubs who were involved in that crazy stolen catch by the fan?
Sure. Moises Alou, Steve Bartman.
Steve Bartman, the famous devil of the Cubs.
Well, the thing, as far as the Cubs book go, I was really surprised by the number of people that either became, like for instance, one of the players, John Tenner, became a senator from Massachusetts, a governor, and then there are players that were accused of murder and kidnapping and all sorts of mayhem. They were Cubs players who were heroes of the Iroquois theater fire, who kicked in the doors and saved people's lives.
Amazing.
These are stories that you just never hear.
No, you don't. Going back to the Loop, and I really want to find out about some of these things that have our viewers, I'm sure, because a lot of people actually watch my show because they knew me from radio. In the times of loop radio and stuff, there were a lot of things that went on in the radio station. There were a lot of lawsuits.
Yeah.
A lot of lawsuits. A lot of FCC warnings and threats. What were some of those FCC warnings and threats or lawsuits that came along that you talk about in the book?
So I actually went into the FCC files and read the complaints. They're all available online. You can go yourself, fcc.com, I think it is. But while I was Steve Garry's producer, we were fined by the FCC for violating community standards, I believe was the term. But if you go back and read it now, it's pretty tame compared to some of the stuff that you can see or hear now. And the fine, I remember at the time being so worried about this fine. It was $6,000. You know, wasn't exactly going to break the bank. You know.
No. Well, I wanted to also go into Lorelei and the Loop Girls.
Oh yeah.
So you know, I met most of them over the years at events and coming to see them, and people always said to me, "Don't post pictures with them. It's not right for a rabbi." Just pictures, but tell me about the Lorelei, who was the most famous of Loop girls, and all the Loop girls over the years. And were there any shenanigans and secret things that people didn't know about them, or were they really just models that got hired to kind of promote the station? Tell me a little bit more about the Loop girls, because I saw them only at promotions.
Well, Lorelei is the most famous.
I'm on Facebook with her, by the way.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, we're friends.
So here's the strange thing about Lorelei. She only was in Chicago physically 3 times.
Wow.
All those years. She's in the commercials. You know, if you've seen those commercials, I'm sure you remember them if you were around at that time. Then she came to Disco Demolition. Sure. She was there on the field with Steve Garry. She came for a concert that involved all local acts at the International Amphitheater, and she also was at a what was the third thing? And the third thing was when she came to film the commercials. But she only was here 3 times, but she made a huge impact, and people remember at the International Amphitheater show. There was a line that was 4 hours long just to meet her, just to have her autograph.
Isn't that wild? Yeah. Isn't that wild?
And she's such a nice person. The other thing she said
Very nice person.
She said that nobody realized at the time that she was in her 30s. She was a mom. She had like an 8-year-old and a 5-year-old, and she was nothing at all like you would think that she was based on the
image that she represented.
Yes, exactly right. Yeah. She's a totally normal person.
Very nice person too. Very nice.
Her lips are the lips in the Rocky Horror Picture Show poster.
Really? I did not know that.
Yeah.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
That's so cool. So I was invited, because my parents lived in California already, to come to LA to CBS Studios to Steve Garry's special that they did at CBS Studios, and I was there with them, and they invited me on and everything. Tell me about outside events that you might talk about that were based on Loop characters, Loop employees and stuff. Did you talk about any of those?
Yes, sure. There's lots of them. You know, Jonathan Brandmeier was a television star in addition to being a radio star. He hosted national shows. He filled in for Arsenio Hall. He filled in on remember the show called Friday Night Videos?
Sure.
He hosted that with Phil Collins.
Yeah.
He had his own nationally syndicated
TV
show.
NBC, I believe,
right?
NBC, if I remember correctly. And he was based in Los Angeles for a long time.
He was, yeah.
For a long time. One of the things, I think, one of my favorite memories would be going to see Johnny B and his band, the Leisure Suits, at the defunct Hoffman Estates Poplar Creek Outdoor Music Theater, which was one of my favorite music theaters. I went to a lot of concerts there.
Me too.
But I'm not sure that I enjoyed a concert more in that music theater, and I saw big names. I saw Heart there the first time they toured and stuff, and I saw, you know, Jethro Tull there, and just a lot of my favorite band, Neil Young, Crosby, Stills and Nash. I saw so many bands there that I loved, but my favorite show, I think, was Johnny B. and the Leisure Suits. Amazingly enough, it was the most entertaining show probably I ever saw in an outdoor concert up to that point.
It also set the attendance record at Poplar Creek. There were more fans for that concert than there were for any other concert in the history of Poplar Creek.
All right, so one of my favorite shows from Steve Dahl and Teenage Radiation was with Joe Walsh. The Steve Dahl, Joe Walsh concert, which was also a tremendous, I can't remember where it was. I think it was the International Amphitheater, maybe. Yeah. I really can't remember now. That's also a defunct stage. But a great show, and interestingly, sold out house.
Yeah.
Sold out house.
Yeah.
And Joe Walsh was the backup band.
You know, Joe Walsh was a good friend of Steve and Gary.
I do know that.
We had him on the show many times, including one time when he was on. He was touring with the Ringo Starr's All-Star Band.
Yes.
And he was
his brother-in-law.
He was in the studio, and Steve said, "Hey, how about getting Ringo on?" And Joe handed me the phone, and gave me the number. I got Ringo Starr on the phone, and we had a Beatle on the show, which you know doesn't get any bigger than that.
Doesn't get any bigger. As a matter of fact, before we were taping today, before we taped today, I listened to only for the second time the new Now and Then Beatles song on the radio. I couldn't leave the car until the song was over because I'm still listening to the nuances of it because only the second time I heard it.
Yeah.
And love it. That's such a cool thing. And just 2 weeks ago, I saw Ringo Starr and the All-Star Band at the Chicago Theater, and it was a tremendous show.
Yeah.
Just a tremendous show. Enjoyed it so much. Really amazing. Wow, this is great. I can't thank you enough for being on the show, for being here. This was a short show because we talked about a lot of things. But this is Rick's latest book, The Loop Files, oral history of the most outrageous radio station ever. And if you were a Loop listener, you definitely want to take a look at this book. Definitely, if you weren't a Loop listener, you will learn so much that you had no idea about by seeing this book. And don't forget to pick up EveryCubEver. That is tremendous, especially if you're a Cub fan. And if you like novels, spy novels, back in the DDR, Rick's third novel.
Yes.
Rick's third novel, back in the DDR. I want to thank you so much again for being on the show. If you want more information, email us, info@tvrabbi.com. I will forward it to Rick. He will send you back, I'm sure personally, an email with any information you might want to know about his books. And thanks again. This was great. Thank you for being with us. Remember, you can check out our website, www.tvrabbi.com, where you can also see former shows on the web. Once again, if you want to email Rick or me, just send it to me, info@tvrabbi.com. I'll forward it to him, and I know he'll get back to you. And once again, this is one of my favorite people. He is author, he is publisher, he is radio producer, he is Rick Kaempfer. You're the best, and I love the Loop shirt. What a great way to come on the show. And hope to see you all next time right here on Taped with Rabbi Doug. Shalom, everyone.
And I'm talking about Rabbi Doug. Talking about Rabbi Doug. Talking about Rabbi Doug on your TV show. Well, he's the rabbi for me anytime you need. You're gonna get married or you're gonna die. Gonna see Rabbi Doug. Gonna see Rabbi Doug. Gonna see Rabbi Doug. Gonna see Rabbi Doug on the TV tonight. Gonna see Rabbi Doug. Gonna see Rabbi Doug. Gonna see Rabbi Doug on the TV tonight.
Hi, this is John Records Landecker, and this has been a Taped with Rabbi Doug production.